Hi everyone. Our presentation is on cognitive and emotional impairment, environmental and cultural factors. So Danielle focused on ADD and ADHD. My name is Haley. I focused on chronic anxiety and depression, and Hannah focused on PTSD. So first off, we'll talk about cultural environment with media. So those with cognitive and emotional impairments are portrayed as extremely dramatic, attention-seeking, dangerous, criminals, and unpredictable. These portrayals put the population at risk for fear, rejection, ridicule, and impaired self-esteem. So the media portrays cognitive and emotional impairments such as ADD and ADHD, chronic anxiety, depression, and PTSD in a negative manner overall. They portray these types of populations as like I just said, the dramatic images that are portrayed in the media that deal with cognitive and emotional impairments have a negative connotation to them. They can be distorted and, for the most part, inaccurate. 1 in 4 people live with mental disorders and are not all attention-seeking and unpredictable. With these negative portrayals in the media, it puts population at risk for being misunderstood and can cause fear, rejection, ridicule, and impaired self-esteem to individuals in this population. Next, we'll look at family support. The support from family members is incredibly important for those with cognitive and emotional impairments. According to Unit for Sight, social relationships such as those found in close families have been demonstrated to decrease the likelihood of onset of chronic disease, disability, mental illness, and death. For those individuals that suffer from cognitive and emotional disorders, support from the ones closest to them can help them heal and improve their overall health outcomes. So role of peers. Peers that have lived with or have experienced cognitive and emotional impairments can relate to individuals in this population and give them advice for ways to improve. The positive effects of that peer support can have on this patient include hope, quality of life, empowerment, self-efficacy, and the expansion of social networks. On the other hand, peers who do not understand the impairments or hold on to the stigmas that are associated with them can be destructive to this population. It can be very destructive to their health outcomes. Cyclical nature. So chronic anxiety and depression can be passed on through generations due to genetics. If a parent or sibling has major depression, an individual is 2 or 3 times more likely to develop depression. Individuals with cognitive and emotional disorders can relapse and fall back into old habits. According to Stanford Medicine, if someone has a parent or sibling with major depression, they're probably 2 or 3 times greater risk of them getting that depression. And yeah, they fall into those old habits. If they don't have the emotional support, it can be very difficult. Legal and political system. In more recent times, people and policymakers have been more accepting and inclusive of individuals who suffer with mental illness. The federal government has started implementing more research and funding, as well as establishing more facilities for mental health services, which is great. While this may be good progress, there is still somewhat of a barrier for this population to access services. Some of the main factors that we have identified are an overall lack of facilities or extremely high rates for services, as some of them do not take insurance. Some people in this population may not have insurance or the ability to get themselves to these services. The federal and state government are headed in the right direction, but there's still a long way to go. Potential barriers. So the ones that I focus on is like family, friends, employers, and society, which are pretty big ones. So people with mental illness have been outcast for a very long time. Back when nobody understood what was happening, they were persecuted and still can be today. Family may not understand what the person is going through and therefore treat them differently. They may not have very many friends with school and having depression and anxiety, they may even seclude themselves. It can be hard for people with mental illness to find a job because they are different. There are stigmas regarding mental illness that they can't function on their own. They can't concentrate with like the ADD, ADHD. They would need too much direction, or they would have to call in sick a lot more than the average person. This is kind of the barriers that people have. They can experience rejection from people they care about and total strangers on the street. Most of the world shunned or rejected the mentally ill for a very long time. It wasn't until more recent years that the stigma has been changed in many developed countries. There have been more services provided for this population and more acceptance of mental illness as truly just that, an illness that needs treatment. On the other hand, there are still many areas of the world that will shun the mentally ill. There have been reports of Middle Eastern societies that have prosecuted the mentally ill or tortured them. In African countries, they believe that the mentally ill are possessed by evil spirits, and most Asian countries completely reject the idea of mental illness. So, definitely some areas of barriers. Socioeconomic status. So, mental illness recognition, celebrity versus like the regular guy. There are so many people out there with mental illness, and a lot of them are just pushed aside and ignored because they don't have insurance, or and they can't get the help that they need. I have noticed personally with the celebrity versus the regular guy that if a celebrity or a higher socioeconomic status person is diagnosed with something like some sort of mental illness, that it blows up in the social media and the disease becomes more recognized and research boosts. Like there could be thousands of the regular guy that have it, but then there's one celebrity and then all of a sudden the mental illness is known. So that definitely determines how recognized it is. And it may cause them to become lower socioeconomic status. So having a mental illness can actually cause them to have, like not having job security, having the family dynamic support, and schooling. They may drop out of school if they have problems, if they don't have that support that they need. Race and ethnicity, so definitely culture with this, family dynamic, and work ethic. There are certain races that would exile loved ones because they don't understand a mental illness that they're going through, and so they may not talk to that person, exile them. Culture can really affect a person and their view on their mental illness. It may, like, some people just depress it. They don't think about it because it's taboo. In a study I found that they discovered that certain races, the family prefers to take care of everyone with a mental illness, and others decided that it was good for them to work and to be independent and take care of themselves. So they can able or they can enable these people with mental illness. Religion. Religion can benefit those that have cognitive and emotional disorders because it gives them a sense of belonging and initiates social engagement, which can assist in improving disorders like depression, anxiety, PTSD, and ADHD. Religious institutions identify life lessons for individuals when they are faced with challenges. They encourage self-reflection and prompt expression of oneself, whether it be through art, music, or other religious practices. So religion can be great. Gender. So women are more likely than men to have these mental illnesses, and men tend to hide it and man up. So the word hysteria comes from hyster, which is uterus. This term was created because of women having mental illness and people thinking that they were crazy and kind of associated with PMS and all of that. Women are more likely to talk about having a mental illness than men. Men tend to hide it and like man up, and it's more taboo for men to talk about having their mental illness. So in the study Silence is Deadly, they were trying to figure out ways to help men seek help, because men tend to want to just deal with it on their own. And when they're dealing it on their own, and they're having these depression, anxiety, PTSD, or ADHD thoughts, if they get to the point with suicide, men are more likely to succeed with suicide over women because men tend to use more lethal means of committing suicide, whereas women, it's more of like a cry of help, and so they do not succeed as much. It's more attempts rather than successful suicide. It is important to dispel belief that people should just buck up and deal with their illness on their own. And we need to help these people get help, even if they're a man or a woman. They still need the help, and it is good for us to encourage them to get help. Geographical location. It has been shown that geographical location can play a big part in development of mental illness. Some of these factors can have a chemical effect on this population, while others may just be factors that can contribute to things like depression, anxiety, or PTSD. Geographic location, so extreme hot or cold temperatures, pollution, frequent occurrences of natural disasters, high crime rates, and poor housing quality. I know for sure in Cache Valley there is a lot of depression during the winter because of no sun, and you need that vitamin D. So definitely geographical location affects people's mental health. Bias. So regarding implicit bias, so implicit bias is when you are subconsciously thinking about this bias, and then explicit is more of like an external, you're actually thinking about this bias. So most people, when they hear that I have depression and anxiety, their first reaction is, oh, I'm so sorry, like, are you okay? I'm here, aren't I? Like, I'm okay. Then after that, they may become biased and think that I can't handle certain things, so they cater their conversations as not to offend me or make me anxious or depressed. When going into a job interview, they aren't supposed to be biased, but sometimes, since we are all human, they might not want to hire someone with a mental illness, thinking they will take more sick days, or like they can't handle the work, they're not going to be able to concentrate. So that can definitely be a bias that people like are subconsciously thinking during a job interview, even though they're not supposed to. For explicit, people think that people with mental illness need help, and which is I think that's a good bias. It can be true for most people, but there are some people out there that can handle on their own. We just need to like read the situation, ask them if they need help, and help them get the help if they need it. It is important that we treat these people as human beings and let them know that we are here for them, and that just don't suppress them. Don't enable them. All right. For the international scope, with cultural environment, most of the world shunned or rejected the mentally ill for a very long time. It wasn't until very recent years that the stigma has changed. So we kind of talked about this in one of the previous slides. But there's still areas of the world that shun mentally ill, like the African countries and the Middle Eastern, thinking that they have evil spirits, so that can be very difficult. Health disparities with the international scope. Unfortunately, there are more disparities than solutions worldwide. The goal would be to get the world population to change their negative beliefs or mental illness and improve their resources to aid population. As previously mentioned in this presentation, there is still a long way to go, and many of these populations that reject mental illness have had old beliefs of it being sin or possession of evil spirits, and people are definitely set in their ways and hard to change. Our goal with this presentation is to bring light to the lack of resources and lack of acceptance seen among mentally ill. We hope to show that mental illness does not make an individual any less human, but that is just an illness that needs to be treated just like any others. So here are our references, and I hope you guys enjoyed the presentation. Thank you very much.